but it's the mindset of supply chain, and it's how you think about things and how you, again, that start to finish process. So I looked at it as an opportunity of being able to grow people the way I wanted them to be on my team, and to help understand what drove me to be successful and what I needed to do to be successful for all these organizations. So as we started hiring, I got to start talking to them that way.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we are speaking with Nancy Wobig, Senior Director of Medical, Surgical, and Lab Contracting at Mayo Clinic Supply Chain Management. And Hayes, I've known Nancy for quite a while. I've been running into her at the IDN Summit for several years now, and she leads a dynamic team with Captis and the Mayo Clinic, and it's grown substantially over the years. And she's going to talk to us a lot about team dynamics today.
I love Nancy. She's fantastic. So come on, enjoy today. I think you're going to learn a ton of things she talked about. Everything we talk about Zoom. We talked about basically Husker football, the Vikings, and we talked about everything, including her ability to write handwritten notes to her team. So hop on, enjoy today. It's going to be fantastic.
All right, we're going to be right back with Nancy after a short break.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Nancy Wobig, Senior Director of Med Surg and Lab Contracting at Mayo Clinic Supply Chain Management, joining us today. Hayes and I are very interested to talk about supply chain management. I'm going to put that in air quotes because it's really a discussion around team dynamics. And those dynamics have changed a lot over the last several years, Nancy. And so welcome to the show. And thanks for coming on to share kind of your insights over how you adapted during a changing environment.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.
All right, Nancy, I got to jump in off the jump here. Justin, you already used the term team dynamics and all that already. I need to know, Nancy, what team do you pull for in the real world of college football? Is there one out there?
Well, I actually have two. I was born in Nebraska, so I have a Cornhusker blood, but I live in Minnesota, and I graduated from the University of Minnesota, so I do also bleed maroon and gold. So 1 week every year, I'm a happy girl because one of my teams is bound to win that 1 week. So when they play each other.
Well, as you know, I do think your Cornhuskers are on the up and comer. And then what about professional teams right off?
Well, I'm going to say I'm a Minnesota Viking fan, which has not been an easy season. It was kind of a downer on New Year's Eve. Honestly, that was not a good game against the Packers, which is always a big rivalry, but we made it through, and I won some money, so that's what it really came down to. So.
Oh, we got somebody betting. I like that. Well, and I mean, again, who saw the Vikings go through about 10 quarterbacks this year? So we have to give you a little leeway there. But anyway, thanks for sharing, and appreciate that.
And I can't believe it. So here's the thing. I mean, we're going off script a little bit in this interview, but Gary is actually made it. Now he's late, and so we're going to tease him a little bit. He's late, but he made it to the party. So, Gary, we got Nancy joining us today. I welcomed her to the podcast. I want to welcome you back to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, Nancy, nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you
I'm
too,
gonna,
Gary.
I'm nice to meet you. I'm gonna try to just not take too much heat from Hayes and Justin, but I do apologize and I don't want to slow the process. Nice to meet you, Nancy. Thank you for your time today.
Justin, I don't
Well,
recognize this guy. Could you
I
tell us
know.
who he is?
Well, it was funny, Gary. I'm going to let you in on a secret and the listeners that we had Nancy all set up to call you out several times during the interview, including Gary. That's a great question, but you're here now, so I'm sure you'll ask lots of great questions today.
I'm not sure, but okay.
All right. Well, Nancy, why don't you talk about your background, right? Because I know you're extremely passionate about supply chain, and you and I have run into each other at several conferences over the last many years, even before we had quite a break, which kind of ties into today's conversation in in-person events. But how long have you been at your role? How has it changed over the last several years, and how did you find your way?
Well, I'll start. It's hard to believe I'm going to say this, but I have been in the supply chain field for almost 40 years. I got into it right out of college before supply chain was really anything anybody knew about. I did logistics, which was called logistics at the time. I did order fulfillment, and that was just order fulfillment. And in 1997, I joined IBM in Rochester, Minnesota, in a true supply chain role, which I took all the things I had learned from my history and the other roles and pulled it together into understanding the start to finish of supply chain, and from contracting to ensuring supply, negotiations, all of that. And when I got to IBM, I started managing a fairly large team and found that my real passion, while we could say supply chain is a little bit of a dry field, I loved it. I loved the impact that we had from beginning to end of what could be profitable, add in sales, and yet save money on one end. So it was a real, start to finish process that I really enjoyed. But what I found is I was really enjoying the whole process of team management. And so in 2002, I went to Mayo Clinic and decided to try. I'd been in technology and in manufacturing. And in Rochester, Minnesota, there were two industries. There was Mayo Clinic in healthcare and IBM. And so I thought, what a great way to stay in the area and try something and work for such a world-class organization. So I went to Mayo. And when I got to Mayo, I realized that supply chain was not what they were about, right? They are about taking care of their patients. And that's what their skill and their mindset and everything was about, was making sure the patients had what they needed to be taken care of in the best way, and making sure that the providers were always taken care of. Well, as times changed and cost pressures came, supply chain became a bigger and bigger dynamic, even within the healthcare industry. And we always said we were about 10 years behind manufacturing, but suddenly we didn't have 10 years to catch up. So it was about how do we become better at what we can do within supply chain. And I was able to start bringing in some of the great things I had learned from a world-class supply chain at IBM into healthcare. And then in 2008 was able to join Mayo in a different function as they started providing contracting and supply chain management best practices to other healthcare providers across the country. And that's where our aggregation group was formed. And I started with that role, trying to build processes. How do we work best between the Mayo Clinic contracting team and our Vizient counterparts as a shared organization, as we formed a Cactus, it is called. And then how do we work with suppliers? How do we work with the members? And how do we put all those processes together? So I got that role and I started working on medical surgical contracting. And at the time I had a staff of 2, but a big group of people that I had to help and support with analytics and legal terms and conditions, and then all these members that we started to bring on.
When you mentioned that you brought a lot of, that supply chain experience from a world-class organization like IBM, can you remember, because, I kind of want to put it into context because I feel like healthcare has come a long way, in the last, I'd say especially the last 10 years, but definitely over the last 20. What were some of the things, if you can remember, that you were doing at IBM that healthcare really wasn't doing at the time that maybe is more commonplace in healthcare supply chain today? Can you put that into some context?
Yeah, and I think it was really talking about working with the suppliers as not individual entities within, like Mayo Clinic had many locations. So it wasn't, I'm negotiating for this product for Rochester or this product for Florida. It was, let's take our total volume. Let's see what we can do in aggregate. Let's see how we can consolidate the volumes, which is really what then played into Captis and the work that we do for Captis. It's now I don't just get Mayo and all its entities. I get, we're at almost 100 entities right now of IDNs across the country that we get to negotiate for. So that was probably the biggest one, was how do we take the volumes from everyone, combine them, and then work real closely with the suppliers to see where we can get additional value because of that volume. That one was probably my most passionate one, was saying, I used to be up all night talking to people in France, and then I'd be up and talk in the morning in France and at night into Asia to talk about different volumes and different requirements and trying to consolidate all that, working together. And now I need to do that here at Mayo Clinic.
Also in healthcare, we've seen a lot, the emergence of smart devices, right? So when you were dealing with a lot of those, technology companies working with IBM, I'm not saying that healthcare didn't have tech before that, but when you look at the age of, cyber liability concerns and, all of that type of sourcing that has really, become more on the forefront, I'd say, over the last 5 years, especially as devices became smarter. And you're talking about that. Do you feel like you have insights into what's going on with a lot of the manufacturers, having worked at IBM in that capacity, maybe a little bit ahead of healthcare?
I don't know that it was the IBM experience that got that, but I'm, lucky to work for such a large organization. But every year something is the new hot button that we have to watch for. And when cybersecurity came into play, that was something that no one had thought about. When I found out there were people that worked at Mayo and their whole job was trying to hack into what we were trying to do, I was just amazed at, we have to try to help ourselves, right? And that was a game changer. And now we're asking such different questions of our providers and of our suppliers on how we can help protect them and how we can make sure that we know enough as we're putting contracts in place that we aren't going to cause any kind of risk to our external customers that we're working with.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of interrupted your story about, how you've landed in your current role there, just to kind of put things into context with your experience. But why don't you just tell us, as we kind of tie this up a little bit, your role has obviously changed. You said you managed 2 staff at the very beginning of the formation of Captis. How big is what you're managing now? How has that changed, and what exactly is your role?
So now I have about 30 that are under my purview, and my role is still medical surgical for Captis. Everything that we put into place for Mayo is we use a CQVA, value analysis process, to determine the best clinical products for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And then my team turns it into the best value as well. And we get that honor of negotiating with the volumes that we have with all our Captis members. And so I lead that team. I work closely with our counterparts with Vizient. And then we have some support staff that help us make sure we have the right analytics completed, and that we can then, once we have a good contract, that we can implement it, and that there's product to be received by all of our members.
Hey, Nancy, you might just share us a little bit about Captis itself. And obviously you mentioned about 100 different, members, but what does that look like? Nonprofit? Are they, where's the geography of them? Something kind of give us a little feel for that.
Yeah. So Captis was formed as a joint venture between Mayo Clinic and Vizient. And it was Jim Francis is a name that's used across the healthcare industry and supply chain. And he and Vizient had to have these conversations about what else can we do? How do we continue to advance the work that we do in negotiating for the best products? So they went into partnership, and it became an LLC. And they started with 8 members. that were joined in the upper Midwest area as Vizient membership. And it has grown from 8 to 1. We just hit 100 this past year. And that's at an IDN level. So I don't know, it's almost 500 different facilities that utilize our contracts. And then we also are contracting for Vizient's, what they call the Vizient's Commit program. So we have another 50 healthcare providers that are using the contracts we put in place. So we are a service provider to these members, and it is a Vizient-based organization.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
So, we wanted to kind of talk about, leading a team, managing a team, but I also think, a big part of that is a growing team. You said you went from 2 to 30 staff. That's obviously a completely different level of challenge. And, the amount of members that you're touching went from, I think you said 8 to over 100 at the IDN level, 500 facilities. So, it's kind of interesting because you're not just talking about managing your staff of 30, you're also managing their impact on the membership. And so it's not really just I almost feel like it's exponential in terms of like the actual sort of understanding of the volume and the amount of contact points that you're truly overseeing. Do you want to talk about some of the challenges, as that team was rapidly expanding that you might have faced to grow the team? And I'm sure on one hand you wanted to specialize, but that doesn't mean everybody fit into their specialty just the way you might put it on an org chart, right?
Right. And you think about, Mayo is located in Rochester, Minnesota. And at the time, pre-COVID, we were all on site in Rochester. So the pickings were slim as we were growing. And to find somebody with any kind of healthcare experience or much less supply chain experience was a challenge at times. But that's one that we took on and healthcare didn't historically hire people from outside of healthcare because it was such a unique industry and something that you had to have either a clinical knowledge or be around the industry enough to understand the dynamics that we needed to be successful. And so when we started to be able to bring people in from outside of healthcare, we started getting different perspectives. And rather than looking at it as challenges, I looked at it as opportunity. And I always said, because I've been in supply chain and I was in electronics and then worked on dry baker's yeast. I was importing and exporting yeast. And then I went to IBM and was doing power supplies and cables and all these things. But it's the mindset of supply chain, and it's how you think about things and how you, again, that start to finish process. So I looked at it as an opportunity of being able to grow people the way I wanted them to be on my team and to help understand what drove me to be successful and what I needed to do to be successful for all these organizations. So as we started hiring, I got to start talking to them that way.
Nancy, the whole expansion piece, I think is interesting. I love you sharing on the growth, and obviously we're this is going to launch a little bit later in the year of 2024, but we're on the brink of 1-2 today having the interview. It's the brand new year. So do you go back in time and do like a mini SWOT analysis? Do you go, what really worked well? Let's not lose our core, but let's roll out into new categories, new direction with our new employees. Your training sessions change. How do you make sure you don't lose what that thought process was to move in the right direction, and especially with your new members you're trying to pull in, right? Just curious how you continually evolve, but don't lose sight of why you set it up.
Right. That's a really good question, Gary. You know what was the thing that fell in between then and now is COVID, right? And everything changed. And so while I continue to go back to, we built this team and we brought the people in with the skill sets that we were looking for at the time. And I was building on their skill sets. So whether it was somebody that came from a supplier, so we had a little bit of industry knowledge, or somebody who has a strong analytics background that could help us, or a strong clinical background, or a business background. I always remember and try to build on those skills regardless of the situation. I know who to go to for those different kinds of skills that are needed. as we look through our contracting calendar every year, or our challenges that are put in front of us for cost savings and or supply assurance. We need to continue to remember that. Everything changed during COVID, and I'll never forget what we went through then either. And so, I don't know if I'm answering it, Gary, but it's more about, I want to remember why I have the team I have, and I still have most of them that I had hired before COVID are still with me. Some have advanced and taken on other roles, but we still have a good core.
Yeah, Nancy, just to follow up, you took it right where I was wondering about, and you kind of answered my follow-up question, but it's lanes, right? It's not a one-stop shop. Like, I know we can hire Hayes and he can cover everything because he's just that bright and that smart, and he's, I don't know what team he roots
Talented.
for. Talented. He's a gift. He's definitely gift and special, 100%.
Hey, grab that copy. I need a copy of this right here. Thank you.
But Nancy, I love it. Like when you're working on a healthcare system and you're looking at moving forward with someone to help you support it, it's always frustrating to look at analytics and clinical support, and they don't have everything, right? Keep those people in those lanes that make sense. And I think it's a really nice opportunity to see where you have these members and they can fit these lanes, right? Like med-surg contracts. Do I want an analytics person to really dive into understanding what CRM is or what orthopedics is? We need those lanes, right, Nancy? So you keep them in their lanes, it sounds like.
Yep. And we utilize the skills that go into those lanes, which is the best part.
And let me kind of add on to that kind of this track that we're on, maybe, in the supplier world, many times, if you're a really good sales rep, you hit your quota and guess what? They promote you. And all of a sudden now you've got 10, 12, 20 people under you and you've never been in that role. And it sounds like you kind of grew into that role a little bit. And I guess my question is, Nancy, we've got Tommy in Topeka that's listening right now and who just got promoted. What advice do you give to Tommy in order to make sure he's part of the team, doing a good job with the team, growing the team? How often do you communicate with them? Just kind of give us some practical matters, if you don't mind.
Yeah, when I hire anybody, or as I start to develop relationships even within our membership and their supplier base especially, I am always looking for what energizes people and what excites them about the job, so that I can find a way to connect with them and to remember that if I've got a project that fits that excitement, I know I'm going to hit a home run if I can make them the lead on that project or the lead on that contract. So I'm always looking for that energy and that excitement in the people that I hire. I also try to find out what drains them, right? I mean, and everybody's got something. You put a spreadsheet in front of me, I'm not a happy girl. You put a supplier conversation in front of me and I'm energized. I can't wait to have it. I can't wait to figure out and solve that problem, right? So that's what I would try to do it with both the people I hire internally, the people I work with externally, is how do we connect and how do I help them grow? I have started really doing quite a bit of mentoring we started a women's program at Mayo just to try to help all the women in supply chain, as we found we have my age and then we had a pretty good sized gap and then a bunch of people in their 30s that were like, how do we help them grow and be our replacement someday? And then we got to a point where it's not just it's good for the women, but it's also, we just need it for everyone that's behind us, because we've learned so much in our experiences that we want to make sure that we're mentoring and leading people in the right direction. So that's a fun part of it too, is helping people find the right fit for what they want to do and what they want to work on. So
now you're leading this team of 30. What was the largest size team that you had led prior to that? Because I realize there were a lot of stages along the way, but did you have prior experience leading a large team, or did you have to evolve at the same time that your team was growing? Or did you always sort of say, hey, I've managed a team of 50 before. I know what this looks like in the future. So I have a vision of like step by step how this might work.
I had never led a team that large before, but as it started to grow, what I quickly learned is I needed to surround myself with very talented people, and I needed to empower people to help me be successful. And in the last couple of years, we've been able to promote some of my team members to real leadership titles. and leadership roles too. So now I have layers of people, which I had never had before. That's a new skill set. Is leading leaders is very different than leading the doers. So it's something I'm continuing to grow and learn as well.
It probably reconnected you with some of the things that you developed that you kind of became second nature. And then all of a sudden you're having conversations with other people that are trying to lead the doers. And you're like reminded of some of these skills that you developed that while you might be using them every single day, you weren't necessarily putting into like any kind of verbal explanation or mentorship, right? They were just things that you did. So then all of a sudden teaching other people to do what you developed inherently is a new skill set.
Yeah, and it's very humbling to see people be successful and you can see some of the skills, but it's also humbling to see people lead with different skill sets that maybe I hadn't taught them or they hadn't learned from me, but they're being successful in a different way. And that's fun to watch as well. And to see those people develop is so rewarding.
One thing I liked about what you just said to a few moments ago, I think it was in response to Hayes' question, but how you identified what really sucked the energy or the passion out of your team. I think that's a really important point I want to reinforce because that drain really does kill productivity, and being aware of that is just, another piece of putting people in a position to succeed, right? Because burnout is tough. And a lot more was demanded of the team, obviously, during the pandemic. I think that goes without, really being said to anybody who's listening to a healthcare supply chain podcast. But one of the things that you had told me kind of when we talked prior, to this a few weeks ago was that you really wanted to make sure that everybody was on camera when you had your team meetings for a variety of reasons. And I'll let you expand on this, but the one that really stuck out to me was just so that you could read body language. And when you talked just now about making sure that you understood what drained your team, I think that nonverbal communication ties in well with why your philosophy was cameras on.
Yeah. As I said, we all were in Rochester. We were all in one office. I had everyone steps away from me for years. And as the team grew and as we got better and better, we had more contracts and more customers and more suppliers. And then all of a sudden we were told to go home for a couple of weeks. We didn't have cameras. We were never even allowed to go, stay home on a snow day. It was really, we didn't bring home our laptops and work from home even then. And so it was such a change to all of a sudden have to learn Zoom and how to get us all together. And once we got that going, I met with my team every single day for half an hour at a minimum, and everyone had their cameras on and everyone had their volume on. No one was muted. I needed to understand what their lives were like at home. I was an empty nester, so to come home for me was, I had to figure out technology. That was my biggest challenge. But I watched my team with kids running around in the background and husbands or wives walking by in the back and worrying about what their setup was at home. And the strain of all of that on them was so apparent because, again, I had a younger team and I needed to be able to connect to them, to be in their shoes to help them get through it. And again, my team had med surg supplies and laboratory supplies. So what was impacted more than that, right? And we were responsible for all the communications with our end users at Mayo. I was on daily calls for supply shortages. And then I would have to reach out to my team members and say, we got to get a hold of this supplier and that supplier. What can we do? But I needed to see it. And I did. I could see in their faces. Some of them were just tired. Some of them were sad. I mean, it was such an unknown, and 2 weeks went to 2 months to, 2 years, right? And we watched that go through their faces. I learned more about them, and they all commented that they learned so much more about me because I was either traveling or was in my office and they were in their cubes. And so they didn't have as much interaction with me either. And then all of a sudden we're on it, and I could call them out and I could look at them, and we tried to do fun things. We had bingo and we had, Secret Santa over Zoom, and we did all those kinds of things to try to help build morale, but it was hard and it was was so hard on me to see it in their faces. I was trying to write handwritten notes and mail things to them just to try to connect and to remind them that somebody cared, that there was somebody on their side. And it's like, I don't care if the baby's crying in the background. I don't care. I don't care what you're wearing. We used to be suit and tie and, all Mayo formal. And we were supposed to still be kind of dressed up if we were on with suppliers or anything. I was like, I don't care. Just get on the camera, be there, be yourself, turn your camera on, and let's keep those interactions and those relationships with our suppliers, with each other, with our members. We need that face to face. And I always enjoyed the suppliers were like, suppliers had been working at home forever, and they were always just looking at the intercom or the microphone, right? They never had cameras on. And so to ask them to turn cameras on was really fun, because at first they're like, nope. And then I'm like, I can't do business with you without it. I know how to maintain a relationship with you. I don't know how to build one with you unless I can see you.
So Nancy, you're kind of feeding into my next question. I was going to ask you too. You're in some pretty specialized things. We talk about lab. We talk about med surge. We talk about, you said end users. I call them SMEs, the subject matter experts. Stay in your lane, right? Nancy, stay in your lane. And you also talked about all these individuals going home and now having to be on these calls. And I want to talk about did you see some people grow? Did you see some people all of a sudden become more inclusive on their emails, more inclusive on who was involved on calls? Did you see, I want to know about the growth. Yeah, it knocked us down, but we picked ourselves up. If you can look up, you can get up, as Les Brown would say. And I want to know what strengths you saw with your team, and maybe share a couple good examples of that team management side that you saw growth of this opportunity to excel, I guess, as we had this whole new deal. So I'm curious from your perspective.
Yeah, it is fun to be able to pick those nuggets out and say this was really quite beneficial to, certain people. I think what really showed is once we all got on Zoom, everyone was an equal playing field, right? Everyone is the same size box. Everyone, you didn't know if I was the one sitting on the bench behind the table or at the table. Now everyone's at the table, right? For conversations and with the suppliers. So I saw some of our quieter people that started to understand, really grow and be able to contribute in different ways. And I think that confidence of we're all the same at this point, and we're all in the same room, right? And so the growth there was good to see. We also had, because we were dealing with supply shortages in so many different ways, we had people that were talking to our laboratorians and our warehouse and our clinical end users and our suppliers every day. And we were assigning different people to different roles every week to try to make sure we were learning it. And I've had people who said, my job is contracting, and I suddenly understand how to put a box away in our warehouse because we needed people in the warehouse. And all of a sudden we were dealing with supply shortages, which our team wasn't, we put the contracts in place. They're the best contracts that could be. And of course we're going to get supply. Well, all of a sudden we didn't have needles, and what are we going to do about it? And so it was a different conversation to have. It was a different mindset. How am I going to solve for this? Not only for me, for Mayo, but for our Captus members, wherever I could. But it made people think differently. And now as we get past that, it's hard to get rid of that. We still talk about supply. I still sit on a shortage task force because I'm not going to let that bite me in the butt.
That's perfect. Talked about it today. You're right on, Nancy. Right on. Yep.
I'm still not resting on our laurels or thinking we're through all this yet. So it's a great point, Gary, as people did really grow through it as well.
Well, as we're about getting ready to wrap up here, Nancy, but I'm going to throw out a little congratulations, if you will, to you and your whole team. I have a hospital CEO. He just recently retired of a significant place, had a son who had a cancer bout, went to Mayo. He came back and says it was the greatest experience he has ever seen. He goes, I've been in healthcare for 40 years. He goes, from top to bottom, it was amazing. They operated on him. He's so far so good. That was about 3.5 years ago. He himself, the CEO now, has just had surgery up there no more than 3 months ago. And he just loves the culture, loves the way y'all handle the patient, and just the care you give is, I think, literally probably second to none. So congrats to you and your team.
Awesome.
Thank you. And I tell my team now is on any kind of a resume they might put together, their biggest accomplishment is they got Mayo Clinic through COVID without a worry for the healthcare providers on their safety, and that they always had the products they needed to do what they needed to do for our patients. And Mayo's theme and motto is the needs of the patient came first, and not one of us forgot that through COVID. And that drove us to be successful. So
well done. And it's fantastic. I mean, again, that's the reason
we're
we're
very
all
proud
doing this, right?
to say we work there. Absolutely.
Great mission.
All right, I got one last question for you to just kind of frame this up a little bit, because like you said, you'd like to think you're all the way through it, but not, there's still lasting impacts. And you described how, hey, we did contracts, we put good contracts into place, and then we didn't worry about whether we had supplies. So like all of a sudden the scope of the job changed a lot, for many of the people on your team, and including yourself, and even the way you did business changed. But what do you think that changed in terms of like strategy and the way that you all viewed your roles? What is really gonna, like, no matter what, right? All of a sudden it would be easy to go back to just putting contracts in place. You're not worried about whether or not you're going to get supplies anymore. And I know the resiliency is going to be an ongoing discussion regardless, but what dynamic shift in your team's approach, their dynamics, their mentality, do you think is going to be something that, regardless of, the resiliency of the supply chain, the consistency of being able to deliver, the products will stay? Because Gary asked that question, those fundamentals. This is one of those fundamentals that when all of a sudden the pressure eases, a lot of people could just toss some of these lessons aside instead of making sure that some of that philosophy sticks. What do you think is going to really last, over the next decade or two that came as a result of adjusting to that?
We talk about having to work so hard to ensure supply, and we now know more about our suppliers than we ever did before. I know where their manufacturing is, where they have redundancies. I know where there's risk, where we're in the risky locations. I know where raw materials come from. Way more than I ever knew about our supplier base before. And I think we'll always have that. But as we tell the supplier community, is don't ever think that cost is coming out of this picture. We still have to drive our costs down. So our cost is have so much pressure on cost reductions. And even when we say supply assurance is first, but don't pay any more for it, right? I mean, so now our conversations with our suppliers are different. It's what can we do together to drive down your costs to pass on to us? What do you need from us? What can we do differently that will help us ensure supply, but also continue to drive that cost down? It's never going to go away. It's, you watch, there's hospitals closing every day, and we have to continually keep our eye on raw materials so we're watching, we took price increases. We got to get those back down. So it's just that we're back to the basics without forgetting what we went through. We're back to driving costs down, ensuring supply, and understanding risk in a whole different mindset than we did prior to COVID.
Nancy, great job leading a growing team through all of that, and a great job. This is your first podcast?
Yeah, and I said it was probably too boring for this, but
no, not at all.
It's great. It's good.
You know what? I know why people want to work for you. I want to work for you. You've got a way about
Nancy,
you.
Can I send you my resume shortly?
But you've got a really, you've got a really nice way about you, and that's a compliment.
Thank you.
I could see why you've done so well and been there so long.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nancy, great job. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
All right, that was Nancy Wobig, Senior Director of Medical, Surgical, and Lab Contracting at Mayo Clinic Supply Chain Management. And Gary, a great conversation about just leading a growing team, and obviously the dynamics changed quite a bit over the last several years, not only in the size of the team that she was managing that was growing, but also in the types of challenges, which, really goes unsaid. But what I really, really liked, a couple of takeaways for me, was how, she continued to make sure she understood what really drained her team, not just under duress, like what was happening during the pandemic, but even just the types of activities so that they're set up for success. And then just the way that she made sure that she was still connected and aware of what they were going through by having those team calls and making sure that she could really see that nonverbal communication and stay in touch with them.
Yeah, connected through the duress of the situation, Justin. I think you're right on. The fact that she went back to old school and sent snail mail to her team to let them know that she cared about them, and getting everybody live on whatever it was, Zoom or Teams or whatever it would look like, just to have them present, just to show up and all be on the same playing field to make them feel comfortable. Amazing. I mean, just a great leader. I think Hayes said, I'm ready to go to work for her right now. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, she's just a great leader, and her team management style is pretty dynamic. But learning those strengths of when we were knocked down post-COVID, of where her team went to, was also really beneficial. So just an amazing individual working at Mayo in some pretty significant categories of lab and med surge. Just a great interview. Great to have her on the call.
Oh, yeah.
Love to have her back again, too.
We've had so many great guests, but honestly, what a great time for supply chain to shine, right? And we've had some conversations around leadership, but really, how do you stay connected with your team and understand that everybody is different, and managing those team dynamics, so critical. So want to thank everybody listening on behalf of Hayes, Gary, myself. Thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.